Hey, it's Brandon Laws, and this is Transform Your Workplace, the show where we share practical ideas to build healthier, high-performing teams. Today's episode is sponsored by Xenium HR. When HR and payroll start swallowing your week, Xenium's complete HR plus payroll brings expert guidance, reliable payroll, compliance support, and modern tech together under one roof so you can focus on leading people and growing the business. Learn more at xeniumhr.com. All right, I'm welcoming back my friend Josh Durham, yes, again, because he's pushing a conversation leaders need right now: embodied safety at work. Not just hard hats or harnesses, but the full picture of physical, psychological, and physiological safety. We'll touch on why respectful work is a set of daily practices, not a binder of policies, how simple cues like calm voices, clear signage, clean spaces, and short breathing routines can move teams into a steady, focused play zone, and why honoring our primal needs, survive, belong, become, improves retention, decision-making, and job site outcomes. We'll also talk about rolling this out the right way, starting with a real why, recruiting change ambassadors, and guiding people through the natural resistance curve without losing trust. This episode is quick, human, and immediately useful. Let's get into this idea of embodied safety with Josh Durham. Enjoy the conversation. Well, welcome to Transform Your Workplace. We're back with another familiar voice, Josh. It's good to have you back on the show.
Hey, Brandon. Great to see you. Thanks for having me back.
You bet. I think this is our, seventh time?
Seventh or 7,000th? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can't have you back for a reason. There's you guys so many good stories and so much good stuff to say. So we're going to dive into something you've been talking a lot about and trying to bring it to the trades industries, embodied safety. And this, we're going to cover a whole host of ideas here, but you've often said that safety isn't about hard hats and harnesses anymore when it comes to like construction industry, which is where you're coming from. How do you define embodied safety when it comes to the work you're doing?
Yeah, I'll be very honest. I'm still trying to firmly define it. But what I know is this embodied safety approach that we're taking, the physical piece, the hard hats and harnesses, which are absolutely important.
Yeah.
Are just one component. So, an embodied approach to safety to us means that we are looking at physical safety, psychological safety, and then physiological safety is really the piece that we're trying to add into this equation to bring an embodied approach to worker health and safety, not just in construction, but these basic principles apply to any work environment.
So those three components, the physical safety, psychological safety, physiological safety, that's what makes up this embodied safety that you're describing. And I think the construction industry, for the most part, has only focused solely on the physical safety. And what you're trying to do is, I think maybe some people have been talking about psychological safety. That's become a workplace term I think a lot of leaders are starting to use, but even physiological safety, I don't hear a lot of people talking about that.
Yeah, we've spent the last several decades in our construction industry focused on physical safety. I think back, I've been doing this for 20 years, and even 20 years ago, where we've come in the physical safety technology and approach to it is come a very long ways. And psychological safety, really within the last, I'd say 7 to 8 years, has become a focal point in the construction industry as well, about worker mental health. The construction industry has the second highest rate of suicides of any industry in the world. And psychological safety has a lot to do with that. Not everything, but it has a lot to do with that. So the physiological piece is leading edge. No one's really talking about that yet, but it's really the beginning of the safety cycle that we'll talk about as we step through this today.
Well, let's make this real, because I heard in a talk that you did, you talked about a story, and I hope I'm not butchering the story, but you talk about a young worker who left the industry altogether because of a harassment that happened on your site. And I don't know if you were the project manager, if you were one of the key leaders on that project, but How did that moment shape your belief in having a respectful workplace?
Yeah, gosh. Unfortunately, that's only one story I have of many, but that particular story was really the beginning of my journey, understanding that our responsibility as leaders on construction sites goes well beyond physical safety. So I was the senior operations manager
Oh
on
gosh.
this big project, and long story short, this young man came looking for who the leader was, and was directed to me. And after running this project for over 2.5 years, this is the first time I had heard about some incident of harassment, hazing, and bullying happening. So I was really in a bit of denial and shock when he brought it to me at first. It was like, no way. How's this the first time I'm hearing about something like this? So that's a message I share with construction leaders and supervisors and managers, is that you may believe that you're running a safe and inclusive job site where people respect each other, and that's truly what you want. The reality is there's all sorts of people coming to our job sites and to our workplaces, and we don't know what they're bringing, and we don't know what's happening at every moment. So approaching this with an open mind that it can be happening in your workplace and on your job site, whether you know about it or not, is an important first step to accepting that we play a key role in ensuring whole worker health on our projects.
Yeah, and I've heard you talk about this concept of the hidden staircase
Yeah,
and
yeah.
primal needs to survive, belong, and become. And I'm sure you've seen moments where those needs have shown up on the job site, or you're more aware of it, probably. Maybe talk about that a little bit and just that whole idea that you've explored a lot more.
I won't stop talking about this. It is so important to understanding these three primal desires and recognizing it in everyone else. These aren't primal desires that Josh decided to make up. Okay, this is the biology of the humans. We are constantly, whether we know it or not, seeking survival, a sense of belonging in every space that we're in, and we're seeking to become a better version of ourselves every day. We are in a constant state of change as human beings, and we are trying to become better. And so these three primal desires, they show up in everything, not just at work, right?
Yeah.
They show up in our personal lives. They show up when we're driving to work. They show up even when we're sleeping and having dreams. They are what's driving all of our decision making every day. So that's what I call the hidden staircase. Like, we all intuitively, I think, know this or in our gut, but we forget about it in the daily grind, that every person in our lives, every person at our job site, every person in our workplace is seeking to survive, belong to the group, and become a better version of ourselves. And I think if we ignore that, then it's going to be impossible to create a safe and respectful workplace and a safe and respectful home life.
I think this is where the challenge for leaders comes into play, is like, if we have a baseline understanding of survive, belong, become, and we know that intuitively, like, people have those needs, how do we bring those out in each individual? Like, I don't know if the construction industry, if you're having like one-on-ones with your people, or doing surveys, or things to understand what people desire, because everybody's needs are different, even if they fall into those three buckets. But how do we as leaders explore those at an individual basis? Have you explored that?
Yeah, as leaders, it comes down to understanding each employee is a unique member of your team, right? Whether they are a subcontractor or a craft worker that you don't necessarily directly employ, it comes down to recognizing that each person has these individual needs and acting on those. Now, if you got 500 people in your organization, or 500 people on a job site, are you going to be able to connect with each person every single day?
No.
Impossible and unrealistic, right? But if we are serving the core physiological needs first for every person, which is all about resources that humans need, you're going to create an environment where it doesn't have to be just you connecting with these people at individual level, right? If we are leading with this approach of serving everyone's basic needs and create and empowering other people on your team that are perhaps middle management or even lower to have that same approach, then you have a whole group of ambassadors in your organization or on your job site that can spread that type of approach and have the actual ability to connect with individuals on a one-on-one basis every day. So leaders want to do it all themselves, right? And make the change and wear the cape, right? But leaders really need to think of themselves as guides for others instead, and setting up
Yeah.
more of a culture of respect and safety and an expectation in your organization or on your job sites that all the other leaders that you have working for you or with you are going to do the same thing.
I think a lot of organizations, I'm sure this is true of the construction and trades industry, but they create rules and policies and people are to abide by those. But I think I've heard you say that it's like, especially when you've done like respectful workplace programs, you're more trying to teach people practices, like everyday habits that probably create that psychological safety in physiological safety to survive and belong and become ultimately. What's your take on that and just that mindset shift for the workers that you're
Yeah.
interacting with?
The simplest way I can put the difference is policies are reactive and
Yeah.
practices are proactive, right? So you think about, policies are they're set in place because of some past incident that has happened, right? And they're usually there for the lowest common denominator. While practices, that's about embedding positive habits, positive behaviors proactively in your organization on your job site that are actually going to increase productivity, enhance worker health, increase trust in between individuals. It's just like any sort of positive habit you want to build, in your life. You got to do it proactively, right? And it can be in small bites, but you have to stick with it in a proactive way. Whereas again, policies, they're there because something bad happened,
Yeah.
and we need a policy for that now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you've mentioned like the inconsistent nature of some of these rollouts of respectful workplace programs. Workers could call it BS,
Yeah.
like they don't really understand the why behind some of these things. And they probably think it's a reactive implementation. So in your opinion, what does good implementation look like? What's a cadence for a program of this nature? I know you've been involved with like Rise Up and Green Dot.
Yep.
Maybe just give me your perspective on an implementation.
Yeah. So when we talk about a respectful worksite program, there's really three parts to that. First of all, there's Green Dot or Rise Up. Those are the two nationally recognized and certified programs that are out there. And we train in both of those. So that's one spoke of the wheel. Then it's your physical safety program that you have. Again, whether it's an office setting, you have safety programs for offices as well, or a job site. What is your physical safety program that you're implementing? And then it's these safety signals, these cues, the physiological level, these inputs and cues that we get. So that's kind of the background of when we say inconsistent rollout of respectful workplace programs. That's what we're talking about. So when it comes to doing it well, first, I know it sounds simple, but we got to remind folks of this. You have to start with, why do you care about this, right? And if your why is, well, because that's what the policy says we have to do, you're already losing. And your workers, your employees are going to recognize that. If you treat these things like a check the box scenario, like, yep, we did that training one time, it's done, they're going to know. Your employees and workers on job sites, they got a great BS meter. They can sniff that stuff out really fast. So if you don't have a genuine why that goes beyond policy and profit, you'll lose people, right? And there's a lot of great whys, that you can have. So that's the first thing we tell people. And then leadership in your organization has to prioritize the change. If leadership doesn't believe in it, doesn't prioritize it, doesn't talk about it all the time and why it's important, others will not follow. And even if they do prioritize the change, leaders have to expect resistance. There's going to be resistance. Change, when it's perceived as a threat, whether it really is or not, will meet resistance. And so you have to demonstrate safe passage to everybody. This change is not going to jeopardize your ability to survive or belong or become. Yeah. This change is safe and it's good for everybody, right? And then, like I mentioned before, the leaders can't do it by themselves. They have to recruit change ambassadors, other folks that are influencers within your organization, influencers on your job site, whoever those people are that others look up to and will follow, right? I call it the Cool Kids Club, except it's an inclusive Cool Kids Club, not like that one in high school that wasn't very inclusive. The folks that are in your organization, your job site, that people want to follow, regardless of their formal title. And then I always tell folks, expect to make mistakes when you're rolling these things out. I haven't done it right and perfect once. It's gotten better every time we roll these out. But expect to make mistakes and then be ready to measure those mistakes. What happened? And then how can we evolve to make it better in the next attempt or later in that same effort? And then at the end of the day, you have to be the steady presence and the guide through the change. Often, again, if you treat this like, check, we did one training at the beginning of this project or one time in our organization, so it's done. That's not being a steady presence or guide. That's checking a box, and it'll evaporate on you, and you will have wasted time and money checking the box.
Yeah, I could just imagine the reactions too. Like they probably chalk it up to HR fluff. Like, oh, here we go again. It's a compliance, like check the box sort of thing. Whereas if you thoughtfully explain the why and connect the dots between like, okay, we respect each other in the work site and the job, our productivity is going to increase because we all feel we're checking the box of our primal needs. And then profitability for everybody, higher wages, happier at work.
Yeah, especially with a program like this, when we're going into a room to present this to contractors, either craft workers or project managers, whoever it is. Can't tell you how many times I've heard someone, come in and mutter under their breath, okay, here comes this HR training. How long is it going to be? Right. And you know what, for me, great. Like now I know who I need to get over the other side of the change line because they don't understand what this is. And I understand why folks have that preconceived notion coming into these because often they don't get well set up and well explained why we're doing this, right? So with everybody, when we're starting these conversations, first of all, we explain that like, this is not an HR policy. This is a practice. You can choose to do it or not. And if you care about productivity, safety, quality, profits, worker health, then you care about what we're trying to do here. Because these are the benefits, the measured benefits that we've seen when these programs are implemented well and consistent. And worker retention too. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's the other one. Not just in the construction industry, but lots of different industries are having trouble keeping good people in their organization. And part of it is because of the workplace that they're working in. And so if we care about those things as leaders and business owners, then you care about creating a respectful workplace because these are the benefits of creating a respectful workplace.
Change is always going to trigger some sort of resistance, whether most people are on board or not. It's just human nature. We're going to go through the stages of denial, anger, eventually acceptance. You talked about this a lot. I've seen you have the big old curve and walk people through that. What have you learned about just teaching people that here's where you might be at right now in the change management process? And just what have you learned about that?
That upside down bell curve of the stages of change, that's not something created by me. This is decades, if not a century of scientific study understanding how the human brain perceives change, right? And I'm just building on that. I always relate those 4 stages back to these idea of every human has the primal desire to survive, belong, and become. And when I kind of boil it down that simply, people are able to approach it easier because it can be a little confusing to, especially leaders, when they think they're rolling out something really important and good for everybody, and then they get shock and denial, closely followed by anger and fear. They're like, what? Why? This is going to be great, right?
It's exciting. We should all
love this. Well, and that's because that leader has thought about it a ton, right?
Yeah.
They know why it's important. They know why it matters. They know the purpose for the change. But what they haven't done is they haven't demonstrated safe passage to everybody. Like, here's how you will safely go through this change in our organization or on our job site safely. And that goes back to this idea of, if you don't think you're safe, you don't feel like you're going to survive, right? So once you do that, and then you invite people into the change rather than calling people out how they're doing everything wrong, now you got people who feel like they belong, right? And once they feel like they belong as part of the change, now they're curious and excited about what this can mean. And once you've tipped that scale to curiosity, acceptance, and excitement, now you have people who are committed to the change. And that's when you set a new status quo within your organization on your job sites for productivity, prosperity, and health.
You are a certified polyvagal professional, and you've talked about I think core to this is like talking about the vagus nerve and using that as cues for realizing if you're safe or not. I think this stems back to like us trying to outrun
saber-toothed
animals trying to eat us, right? or a cougar coming out of the bushes and trying to, eat us. For those who aren't neuroscientists, What's a simple way to apply this in everyday leadership?
Oh, and I'm not either, right? Not even close. The polyvagal piece, which I highly recommend folks look into more on their own. Dr. Stephen Porges is kind of the founding person on this concept and has been studying it for about 50 years. Whether we accept that it's happening or not, it's happening, right? The vagus nerve is the single largest nerve in our entire body. It's the only one like it. It touches basically every type of part of our body and connects with every organ in our body or close to every organ in our body. So this nerve, simply put, is the communication pathway throughout our entire system, entire body. So it's informing our decision making and security system for our body. Security systems, the limbic system. Okay.
So like when I have butterflies, when I'm about
That's
to
the
go
vagus
speak
nerve.
or something, that's the vagus nerve
Yep.
messing with my digestion. Okay.
That's
Great.
right. Yeah, those gut reactions, right? Oh my God, I feel sick to my stomach, right? That's the vagus nerve communicating with the internal lining of your stomach, telling you you better get ready, right? And this is where everyone's heard of, or pretty much everyone's heard of, the fight or flight idea, right? So that our body is constantly scanning for safety. We're basically going back between these two cues of either I'm safe or not safe, safe or not safe. And that is influenced by a loud bang outside or someone saying something really nice to you in a conversation. And whether we like it or not, we're going through this juggle back and forth every moment of our waking and sleeping hours, right? Where do you think bad dreams come from, right? We are processing whether we're safe or not safe. So the other way to think about it is, your body's like a gyroscope, just kind of always, wandering, back and forth between these different states. So, and the vagus nerve plays a key role in that, whether we feel like we're in a sympathetic state, which is fight or flight, or a freeze state, like a deer in the headlights state, right? We've heard about people just freezing up in very scary moments.
Been there.
Yeah, same. So that's that fight or flight kind of state. And then the other side, which we're trying to get people to, is a parasympathetic state, which is where we're either in a rest and relax state, like, man, we just had a great dinner, we're just hanging out with the family, I'm yawning now and I feel relaxed, everything's cool, I'm safe. Or the area where we really want workers, especially when we're talking about workers who are doing physical things, we're trying to get folks into the play zone. And this is this magical thing that we've watched play out, especially in sports, over and over again. You think about Damian Lillard, right, draining back-to-back threes, right? Or Tom Brady, right, just throwing darts that somehow don't get intercepted and constantly getting the ball down the field, right? These folks, these professional athletes, they get themselves in the play zone, which is an activated but safe state of mind. We're not all professional athletes, right? I thought I was going to be. It didn't happen. But we all need to operate in this play zone state. If we're working on a project and we get in the zone and all of a sudden 3 hours have gone by and we've created really great content or produced, really great deliverable, it's the same thing. You're in an activated but safe state of mind. And that's this physiological piece that we've been focused on. And again, all of this is driven by the connection that the vagus nerve has with all the different organs and parts of our body. That's a long answer, but I hope that.
No, it's a great one. It's a great one. And that book that you recommended, I'm forgetting the title. Maybe you mentioned it right now, but it talks about,
world.
Yeah, so I'm reading that, and the play zone it was talking about, that's between like a yellow dot and a green dot. Like you're safe, but I think being active and not knowing what's going to happen next is where the yellow comes into play. So
totally. You think about kids, right? We talk about them being in the play zone all the time. Like, look at them go. They're having such a great time. They're so active and they're doing cartwheels. Like, that's that state of mind, right? And when we were kids, it was a lot easier to get there because we didn't have so many fears and, areas of anxiety and pressure, right? It gets harder as you become an adult and have a lot more responsibilities and understand more how the world works.
Yeah, I was asked to play pickup basketball the other day, and I found some excuse to get out of it because I'm like, I'm going to fall on my ass or tear my knee or something. Like, I just reached 40. I'm over the hill.
Yeah, don't go blowing out a knee. But that's the things we think about, right? We wouldn't have considered that when we were even in our 20s, right? Right. Totally.
When it comes to the vagus nerve, I'm sure there's some signs about how we're feeling. How do we engage our senses to know where we might be at in terms of the safety zone?
Okay. Yeah. So this gets really into the physiological piece. I should probably define a little on a little bit finer point when I say physiological safety, what I mean. So when we talk about physiological safety, we don't have a whole lot of control ourselves over these things, because this is all part of the autonomic nervous system,
Yeah.
the automatic parts of our body. And the single element of our autonomic nervous system that we have control over is our breath. It's the only one, right? Everything else, I guess we can blink more too, but that doesn't do a whole lot for us. But our breath, and there's breath works. There's tons of books now coming out and studies coming out about how our breath, can help put us into a parasympathetic, safe or activated.
It saturates your blood,
yeah,
and that goes to the organs. So I would imagine that's what probably calms your system down a little bit.
Right. I mean, you look at the training that Navy SEALs do. A ton of it has to do with breathing, box breathing, and other types of breathing exercises that even in these very unsafe, tense, unimaginable environments that those types of folks go into, they're able to stay calm and focused and deliver what they need to do because they are able to control their breathing. So when we talk about physiological safety, we're talking about basic human needs. Folks need to have their basic resources met. We're talking about air, water, food, shelter, rest, and protection from harm or danger. So that's what we're talking about. So how do we, knowing that we can't always get in front of every single person, how can we give them tools to help them move into a habit of safety, right? The habit of safety is this. A human gets a cue of either safety or not safety. They absorb that cue, which is a psychological level, the mental level of us. They attend to it and absorb it. And then they either going to feel more safe or less safe. And then that's going to have some sort of physical outcome, whether it makes us increase our breathing, makes us sweat, makes us make a physical mistake like we trip or drop something. That's this 3-point cycle that we are constantly going through. So what we're trying to do is create cues of safety for our employees. Again, whether it's in an office setting or on a job site. Office settings are a whole lot easier to pull off. Job sites are dynamic and change all the time. We've got jackhammers and loud equipment, and that's just how it is. But here are some things that we can do. Essentially, what we want to do is we want to engage the 5 senses, right? Everyone knows what those are. That's not new information. But we can forget that those things really matter to creating a safe work environment. So as leaders, or even if you're not a leader, you're just interacting with somebody, first is a calm voice, right? And a reassuring presence when you're around people, okay? People pick up on those cues. Just like if you got a dog at home, they can tell when you're stressed out, right? They can tell when things aren't okay, even if they don't speak your language. So presenting a calm and reassuring presence. And then providing visual grounding techniques and cues to your people. When I say visual grounding techniques, when you walk into a space, whether it's a job site or whether it's your office, our brain is looking for visual cues that this is a safe area to be in. Okay. So like if you were sitting where you're sitting right now and you had walls around you, but your roof, you didn't have any roof and it was just open to the sky, you would be more anxious right now. Like what's going to happen? Why is there no roof in the space? Okay. So same on a job site. How do we create visual cues, simple things as a welcome sign that's got a map right when you walk in of here's where the porta potties are. Here's where the break area is. Here's where the first aid kits are, right? Simple visual cues like that. And then a clean area, a clean work site, a clean office to work in. Again, visual cues that this is a safe place, well-organized place for you to be in. And then creating a sense of connection and belonging for each person. Again, this especially is so important for people who are new to your organization and new to your job site. That first interaction that they have with whoever that first person is that's orienting them to your organization or to your job site is going to be their first cue of whether they're safe or not, right? So if someone shows up to your job site, it's their first day of work and they can't even find out who to talk to, where they're supposed to go check in. There's no information. That's a cue that, wow, no one has this place under control. Or if your first interaction, you do find somebody immediately, the person that's supposed to show you around, and they are unkind to you or make you feel like less, make you feel like you don't belong. Again, those are cues that you aren't safe. You're not connected to this space. And then the last couple of things that we tell folks when we're trying to engage those 5 senses is implementing simple stretching and breathing exercises. I'm not talking about doing hot yoga here or anything, okay? But there are very simple stretches and breathing exercises that you can implement in an office setting and in a job site setting that will automatically help people calm down and move into a parasympathetic, safe, and potentially activated state of mind. So that's a mouthful, but that's what we're talking about when we're trying to create this habit of good safety on job sites and in workplaces.
You said something earlier in the podcast that I think all of this, if like as leaders and organizations, we don't focus on embodied safety or seek to understand what our people need, retention is what it comes down to at the end of the day. Do you want really good people working for you because they have a sense of belonging and safety, or you're going to lose those really good people and then your business might suffer? So I don't know if you want to touch on anything that you've learned over the years about organizations who are not adapting to this idea of embodying safety versus those that aren't.
Yeah, the risks if employers don't lean into this, whether they're engaging us in that process or not, the risks are the same. And employee retention has got to be right at the top of the list. It's expensive to hire and train and onboard employees. And
sure is.
If you have high attrition, high turnover in your organization or on your job site, that's costing you money. It's costing you profit. And if that's the only risk that someone wants to recognize, then great, because that's probably the number one. The other things that they risk, obviously, is loss of productivity, which again goes back to your bottom line. You're at risk of having a major legal issue pop up on your hands. Okay, if you don't create a respectful and safe work environment, legal issues can follow. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, right. And there's obviously, like in your world, injuries can happen.
Injuries.
The very, very worst thing. That's the worst outcome is injuries, death.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. People are distracted psychologically. They're not going to be able to make the best physically safe decisions. So that could mean maybe they got harassed, hazed, or bullied, and they don't want to ask anyone else for help that's on their crew because they just got bullied by somebody. So instead of asking for help to pick up some heavy thing, they do it on their own and they hurt themselves, or they drop it and they hurt someone else. So if you're distracted up top psychologically, your ability to make physically safe decisions goes way down.
Yeah. And I think the biggest challenge for leaders too is that there's only so much you can control as a leader inside the walls of the work environment. People are bringing stuff and baggage that they have with them from home in their personal life, and you have no idea what they're going through. And so they're bringing that to work. And if they don't have a sense of belonging, it just makes it all the more worse with anything that they might have going on in their life.
That's right. We remind people of this all the time, specifically when we're doing these respectful worksite trainings, is you don't know what people are bringing through the fence, right? You have no idea if their spouse just got diagnosed with something terrible. You have no idea if they're going through a divorce. You have no idea if they just lost somebody. So you don't know what they're bringing in to that space every day. So starting with the default of we're going to treat everyone with respect and make them feel like they belong, at least here, even if they don't feel like they belong wherever they are outside of this workplace. That's critical to achieving your goals as an organization and as a job site, because you're fighting an uphill battle. And everyone's bringing their entire childhood and history into that space too, right? And it's leading up to that very moment every day. And it's constantly changing and evolving. You could have an employee who is a high performer for 6 months, and then one day they show up drunk. And you don't know why, right?
Why'd they make that decision? Yeah, right. Yeah. And that book talks about it too, and I don't know if the science is quite there, so I'm not going to misspeak on this, but there may be trauma that's carried on through your DNA that you have no control over. It's just part of your family lineage.
Yeah,
so there's that too.
There's that too, and I don't know if the science is there yet. That's definitely something that a lot of folks are looking into right now. Although there's so much evidence that potentially supports it, right? If you look at people's history and lineage, it does intuitively seem like there could be something there as well. So again, this basic idea that you got to create a habit of safety in your organization on your job sites is really important, because this, folks don't show up to work just for fun, right? They need to survive. They need a paycheck. They may not want to be there, but they have to be there to live their lives and support those that they need to support. So I think that's a pretty basic human rule of thumb, is that we should approach everyone that way.
Yeah. Josh, this is awesome discussion. Lots that we covered. I always like to leave people with an action item to take from here because this is a pretty in-depth, meaty subject, and maybe the next steps aren't as clear. So if you were in somebody's shoes of listening and hearing embodied safety culture for the first time, what step are you taking? Or maybe there's multiple steps.
I think there's a few. First, if this topic feels relevant to you and your organization, first I would start with, why does this ring true to you? Why does it seem like it's important to look into more and potentially make a meaningful change in your organization? And then I would go to, what challenges does your organization currently face that may be fighting against your ability to create a respectful workplace? Start listing off the bad habits, basically. What are those bad? We all got bad habits, okay? It doesn't mean we're a bad person, doesn't mean we're a bad organization, but what are those bad habits, right? Is it rumor mills? What is it that you think is chipping away at the foundation of your business? And then I would identify who's going to benefit from bringing this approach to your organization, and who are those potential cool kids, change ambassadors that you could bring in to this change journey that you want to go on. So that's some framework for folks, a simple framework to sit down and think about, maybe not just by yourself, but with other leadership in your organization, and just frame that out. And then they can call us if they're ready to make the change, to attempt the change. We are uniquely positioned with this knowledge and with the ability to implement the only 2 nationally recognized respectful workplace trainings programs that are out there. And we're, as you can tell, extremely passionate about this cause, because we believe this is the next evolution of safety in construction and in workplaces in general.
Fun discussion, Josh. A lot of very meaningful, and we'll make sure to put links to all the resources we talked about, including your contact information and all of that. LinkedIn's probably the best way to connect with you, so we'll make sure to put your profile in there. But my guest today has been Josh Durham, a good friend of mine and a returning guest on the show. Josh, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. We'll talk soon.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Xenium HR or the host, Brandon Laws. The material and information presented on Transform Your Workplace is for general information and educational purposes only. Xenium HR or the host, Brandon Laws, does not necessarily endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent. Discretion is advised. Please work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs.